Some call them journals. Some call them diaries. Whatever we choose to call them, they are, for better or worse, a record of our lives. John Skipworth has chronicled his life well. His spiritual journey began at Vacation Bible School.
I understood that God had a son and that he died for me and that I could be forgiven of my sins.
John tried to grow in his new faith, but that didn't last long.
I believe everybody believed in God, but as far as a biblical type of belief that produces an action, I don't believe anyone in our household had that. I don't want to blame anybody, but I just didn't follow through, with what I had said at 12 years old.
John's parents had divorced when he was 2 years old. When his mother and stepfather divorced years later, John decided to live with his stepfather.
So at 16 years old, I became the designated driver. I drove my stepfather with a broken heart after my mom left him. He went deeper in the bottle, and I drove him every night of my life.
John had freedom at his stepfather's, freedom to do anything he wanted.
I went from, drinking beer at 15, 16 years old to at 17, I started smoking marijuana, started smoking pot, with guys out at parties, and then immediately ran into somebody that was doing cocaine. And 90 days later, I was an IV drug addict, sticking needles in my arm, shooting up drugs. I think it was an internal void in me looking for somewhere to belong.
John the addict soon became John the dealer.
I may be selling pot, but I was using as much methamphetamine in one day as I could make money selling pot in a week.
During one drug deal, things went bad very quickly. The sellers met John and the other buyers at a hotel room.
We were ready to expedite the deal. Let's get it over with, get the drugs bought, get them out of here before something really bad happens. One thing led to another, and a fight broke out. I ran over to a bed and grabbed a pillowcase off of a bed. And the fight, everybody's still fighting. I had been fighting, everybody's fighting, and they were trying to get out of the door. And I grabbed a guy. One guy, I didn't know him at the time. I grabbed him when he was trying to run out the door with a pillowcase, and I drug him back in the room. And when I drug him back in the room, my buddies immediately ran to the door, and we got the guy down in the floor of the hotel room and gave him a beating. That was pretty severe.
The young man, JP, was beaten until he was unconscious. John and his buddies panicked, and they wrapped up JP in a sheet and drove to the woods and left the body there. JP got up and started fighting again.
And so I hit him and knocked him down and got my friend free from him. And walking away, I looked at my friend and I said, just cut his throat. And before either of us knew what happened, both on drugs, both out of our mind, I'm standing there 10 foot from him, and all of a sudden blood just all up one side of me. And we were living in a make-believe, tough guy, drug, kind of a subconscious, blurry world that at that moment became very real.
The next morning, a pastor was working behind his church.
And he was setting up chairs next to that canal for sunrise service for Easter Sunday morning. And he heard JP gurgling and moaning, and he found JP. When he found JP with his throat cut, he notified the authorities. The authorities showed up, and when the friends were traveling, they saw all the emergency services, and they went and found out that was their friend. They saw the white bed sheet, and the authorities said, do you know him? And they said, yeah, we know him. They said, where did this happen? They said, a fight happened at this hotel room. And 20 minutes later, Bossier City PD was at the door of our hotel room, and they arrested everybody in the room.
John went to jail for 73 days. His addiction and crimes escalated. He was in and out of jail for 4 years. After a high-speed chase in 2002, John got 20 years in prison because he was a third-strike felon.
I laid down on the floor, and I just was crying. I was broken, and I just started telling God how disappointed I was with myself, how disappointed I was with my life. And I was sorry for hurting my mom. I was sorry for hurting my dad. I was sorry for all the shame. I was sorry for hurting that guy in that hotel room. I was sorry for being a drug addict and a thief and a liar. And it seemed like just a few minutes. It seems just as real today. I just laid there. and I heard the click, 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 click of the electronic door. They said, church call. And I just remember getting up out of my cell, and I walked down there to church, and this little pastor, he came so faithfully. And he always opened the service, and he said, does anybody want to give a testimony? And people would get up and say, I'm going home, or my mama got healed of cancer. And I walked up, and there's like 150, 200, rapists, murderers, thugs, gangbangers, killers. I walked up there, and I said, I just want you to know that today I went to court and found out that I'm a habitual offender and that I'm going to receive a multi-bill, and I'll probably spend the rest of my life in prison for mistakes that I made. And I said, but right up there in that jail cell a minute ago, God just saved me, and I'm going to live the rest of my life for God, even if I spend it in prison cleaning showers.
John was allowed to enroll in Overcomers Training Center, a halfway house. In 2003, the Overcomers group was allowed to go to church. While waiting for his ride back to prison, John recognized a familiar face.
I looked down the corridor there, and I saw a gentleman kind of limping, walking on a cane. And he was getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And the closer he got, I started being able to see a visible scar on his neck. And immediately I realized it was JP. And he walked up to me and he stuck out his hand. And the weight of all of that responsibility just gripped me. It was on me. And it wasn't a time to be a tough guy. It wasn't and I just broke down, started crying. He said, oh man, I forgive you, John. Oh, I love you. Man, I'm glad you're here. God's about to change your life. God's gonna use you to do great things. And he grabbed me and he hugged me that night. He said, I'm glad you're here. It was Easter Sunday. 5 years to the day that the pastor found him setting up for sunrise service on resurrection morning.
John later found out that JP's parents had been praying for him for years. After completing his time with Overcomers, the judge gave John 7 years instead of the 20 that he was expecting. John has been out of prison for 3 years now. He met Brooke at church in 2009, and they married 1 year later.
I know he had a past, but I've never seen him that way, and it's hard for me, even hearing his story a million times, it's hard for me to believe it because I just know who he is, after Christ.
Today, John is the pastor at Thibodaux First Assembly of God. He continues to write about his journey and how God continues to work in his life.
The largest thing that's changed in me is my identity, who I am, and who I am flows out of who I am in Christ. And slowly, year by year, more and more of that is beginning to come out of me.